The stagecoach rattled into Unionville, Nevada, kicking up dust that swirled in the late afternoon sun of 1872. Olivia Whitmore clutched her worn leather satchel to her chest, as the fever that had been steadily climbing for the past 2 days now threatened to consume her entirely. The journey from Boston had been grueling 6 days by train to Sacramento, followed by 2 days on this bone-jarring stagecoach. But nothing would deter her from reaching her destination. Somewhere in this dusty frontier town waited her future husband, a man she knew only through a handful of letters and a daguerreotype that showed a stern-faced cowboy with eyes that seemed to hold both kindness and sorrow. Last stop, Unionville. The driver called out, his voice barely penetrating the fog that had settled over Olivia's mind. The world tilted precariously as she attempted to stand. Her gloved hands trembled as she gathered her skirts, and the hat she'd so carefully selected to make a good first impression now felt unbearably heavy on her fevered brow. "Miss, are you well?" A fellow passenger, an elderly woman who had boarded in Reno, reached out a concerned hand. "Yes, thank you," Olivia lied, summoning what little strength remained to step down from the coach. Her boots touched Nevada soil for the first time, and she allowed herself a moment of victory despite her illness. She had made it. 23 years old and starting a new life far from the ashes of her old one. The town sprawled before her, modest but bustling. A single main street lined with wooden buildings, a general store, a saloon, and what appeared to be a small hotel. Horses tied to hitching posts stomped impatiently while townsfolk moved with purpose down the wooden sidewalks. Nothing like Boston, but it held a certain rugged promise. "Miss Whitmore." A deep voice cut through her feverish haze. She turned, perhaps too quickly, as the world swayed alarmingly. There stood Owen Callahan, taller than his daguerreotype suggested, his broad shoulders filling out a simple cotton shirt, a leather vest hanging open. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes, they were exactly as the photograph had captured them, a startling blue that reminded her of winter skies back east. "Mr. Callahan," she managed, attempting a smile that felt foreign on her flushed face. How did you recognize me?" He tipped his hat slightly. "Your letters described you well enough. Red hair's not common round these parts." Olivia nodded, immediately regretting the movement as the world tilted again. She reached instinctively for something to steady herself and found only air. "Miss Whitmore." Owen's voice sounded distant now, concern etching the edges. The last thing Olivia remembered was the ground rushing up to meet her and strong arms catching her, before everything went black. Owen Callahan had prepared himself for many things when agreeing to take a mail-order bride. He'd prepared himself for disappointment, for a woman who looked nothing like her description. He'd steeled himself for someone who might take one look at his modest ranch and run back east on the next stage. What he hadn't prepared for was carrying an unconscious, burning hot woman from the stagecoach platform through the main street of Unionville, with every eye in town following his progress. "What's happened to her, Owen?" Martha Jenkins called from the doorway of her dress shop. "Fever," he replied curtly, not breaking his stride. "Fetch the doctor to my place, will you?" He didn't wait for an answer as he carefully laid Olivia in the back of his wagon. Her red hair spilled across the rough wooden planks, a stark contrast to her unnaturally pale face. The freckles that dusted her nose and cheeks stood out prominently against skin that should have been rosy with health. The ride to his ranch, 3 miles outside of town, was the fastest he'd ever made it, every jolt of the wagon causing him to wince on her behalf. His mind raced with practical concerns. He had no experience with sickness, had barely spoken more than 10 words to a woman since his mother died 3 years prior. But beneath those thoughts ran a deeper current of worry for this stranger who had traveled across a continent to marry him. By the time he pulled up to his modest two-room cabin, Olivia was muttering incoherently, her hands plucking restlessly at the collar of her traveling dress. The fever had clearly taken firm hold. Owen lifted her as gently as possible, surprised at how light she felt in his arms. Inside, he placed her on his bed, the only one in the house, and stood back, momentarily at a loss. Then instinct took over. He pulled off her boots, loosened her collar, and fetched water from the pump outside. "Water," she murmured when he pressed a cup to her lips, the first coherent word she'd spoken since collapsing. "That's right," he said softly. Small sips now. Her green eyes fluttered open briefly, confusion evident before they closed again. Owen dampened a cloth and placed it on her forehead, alarmed at the heat radiating from her skin. It was another hour before Dr. Wilson arrived, his medical bag clutched in one hand. "Martha said your bride arrived with more than her luggage," the older man said, moving immediately to Olivia's side. "Fever took her the minute she stepped off the stage," Owen explained, hovering awkwardly. The doctor examined her thoroughly, listening to her chest with his stethoscope, checking her pulse, peering into her eyes when he could coax them open. "Influenza, most likely," he finally pronounced. "Been seeing it in travelers coming through. The close quarters on those trains and coaches are perfect breeding grounds. Is she—" Owen couldn't bring himself to finish the question. "Going to die?" Dr. Wilson shook his head. "Not if we're vigilant. She's young and appears strong despite her current state. But the next 3 days will be critical." He provided instructions: keep her cool, ensure she drank water whenever possible, watch for signs the fever was worsening rather than breaking. He left medicines, tinctures that smelled strongly of herbs and alcohol, with careful directions on when to administer each. "I'll return tomorrow," the doctor promised, packing up his bag. At the door he paused. "Not exactly the wedding night you anticipated, I imagine." Owen felt heat rise in his face. "We're not, that is, we haven't." The doctor raised a hand. "No need to explain. Just do right by her, Owen. She's traveled a long way to be your wife." After the doctor left, Owen pulled a chair to the bedside and settled in for what would be the first of many long nights. He studied Olivia's face in the lamplight, the delicate arch of her eyebrows, the slight upturn of her nose, lips that would be full and expressive if not pressed thin with discomfort. She was beautiful, more so than her daguerreotype had suggested, and the thought that she might die before he even truly met her struck him with unexpected force. "Don't you die on me, Olivia Whitmore," he murmured, refreshing the cool cloth on her forehead. "Not when you've come so far." Night fell fully, bringing with it a stillness broken only by the occasional cry of a coyote and Olivia's labored breathing. Owen maintained his vigil, changing the cloth when it grew warm, supporting her head to help her drink, and speaking softly to her though he wasn't sure she could hear. He told her about the ranch, modest but growing, about the 15 head of cattle he'd built up from just 3, about the vegetable garden out back that needed a woman's touch, about the second room he'd been fixing up for her arrival. He told her about Unionville, the community, the church they'd built last year, the schoolhouse that was nearly complete. As midnight approached, her fever spiked higher. She thrashed against the bedding, calling out names Owen didn't recognize. He caught her flailing hands in his, surprised at how small they felt enveloped in his calloused grip. "Easy now," he soothed. "You're safe. You're in Unionville, Nevada. Remember, you came to marry Owen Callahan." "Owen," she repeated, her eyes opening briefly, unfocused. "The letter." "Your mother's brooch." "That's right," he said, surprised she remembered such a detail. In one of his letters, he had mentioned his mother's silver brooch, one of the few precious things he hoped to someday give his wife. You remembered. Pretty, she murmured before slipping back into restless unconsciousness. Owen continued his efforts through the night, dozing occasionally but jerking awake at her every movement. By dawn, he was exhausted but determined. The fever hadn't broken, but it hadn't worsened either. Martha Jenkins arrived shortly after sunrise, carrying a basket of supplies. Thought you might need some help, she said, eyeing Owen's haggard appearance. No proper man knows how to tend sickroom. Owen accepted the help gratefully. Martha showed him how to properly sponge Olivia's face and arms to help reduce the fever. Taught him to coax broth between her lips even when she seemed reluctant, and explained the importance of changing the bedding despite the difficulty of moving the patient. I'll stay while you get some rest, Martha offered mid-morning. Owen shook his head. I'll see this through. Stubborn as always, Martha sighed. Your cattle need tending. I promise I won't let your bride die while you milk the cow. He relented eventually, performing his essential chores with record speed before returning to the bedside. Martha gave him an appraising look as he immediately checked Olivia's forehead. You care for her already, she observed. That's good. Mail-order matches can be cold affairs. I don't know her, Owen protested. Yet you haven't left her side. Martha gathered her things. I'll return this evening. Try to eat something yourself. After she left, Owen resumed his place in the chair, which had begun to feel molded to his form. Olivia seemed marginally more peaceful, though her skin still burned beneath his touch. You picked a fine way to avoid wedding day nerves, he told her, attempting humor despite the gravity of the situation. Though I admit, I'm grateful for the chance to look at you properly without worrying about saying the wrong thing. He studied her face again, trying to reconcile this woman with the letters he'd received over the past 6 months. Letters filled with intelligence, wit, and a quiet determination that had impressed him. She'd been honest about her circumstances, the death of her parents in a fire that had taken their home, and her need to forge a new path. She hadn't begged for rescue, but had proposed their arrangement as a mutually beneficial partnership. Your letters never mentioned you were so pretty, he continued, feeling less foolish talking to her as the hours passed. Probably for the best. I might have thought you were lying if you had. The second day of Olivia's illness brought little change. Dr. Wilson visited again, pronounced her condition stable if not improved, and advised continued vigilance. Owen barely left the bedside except when Martha or the doctor's wife, Eleanor, came to assist with Olivia's more personal needs. Word had spread through Unionville about the mail-order bride who had arrived only to fall desperately ill. The community responded as frontier communities often did, with practical assistance rather than mere sympathy. Women from town arrived with meals for Owen. Men stopped by to handle his chores, and even the town's most notorious gossip, Widow Hathaway, brought a quilt she had made for the wedding bed. But I suppose it will serve for the sick just as well. By the evening of the second day, Owen had developed a routine. Every hour he would refresh the cool cloth on Olivia's forehead. Every 2 hours he would attempt to get her to drink water or broth. He administered the doctor's medicines according to the schedule, marking the time on a slip of paper to ensure he didn't miss a dose. In between, he would talk to her, read to her from one of the few books he owned, or simply watch the subtle changes in her expression as she battled the fever. That night, her fever reached its most dangerous point. She shivered violently despite the heat radiating from her skin. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, and no amount of cool cloth seemed to provide relief. Owen felt panic rising in his chest. He considered writing for the doctor but feared leaving her alone. Instead, He did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed. "Lord, I know I haven't been much for church since Ma died," he whispered, one hand holding Olivia's, the other clutching the silver brooch he'd removed from his drawer. "But this woman traveled across a continent to be my wife. Seems wrong she shouldn't at least get the chance to change her mind about me proper." As if in response to his awkward prayer, Olivia's eyes fluttered open, clearer than they had been since her arrival. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "My home," Owen said quickly, leaning forward. "Our home, I suppose, outside Unionville." "We're married." Confusion clouded her features. "No," he assured her. "You arrived with a fever. Been tending to you these past 2 days." She attempted to sit up but fell back weakly. 2 days, but your letters, you said the preacher only comes through once a month." Owen couldn't help but smile at her concern. "He'll come again. Your health matters more than a wedding date." "Water?" she asked, and he helped her drink, noting with hope that she seemed more aware of her surroundings. "Your fever's been high," he explained. "Doctor says it's influenza." Olivia closed her eyes briefly. "I started feeling ill in Sacramento, thought it was just exhaustion from the journey." "You should have waited, gotten treatment there," he chided gently. A small, weak smile touched her lips. "And risk you thinking I'd changed my mind after you paid for my ticket." Owen felt something shift in his chest. This woman, barely conscious and gravely ill, was concerned about his impression of her reliability. "Rest now," he said softly. "We'll have plenty of time for talking when you're well." She drifted back to sleep, but it seemed more natural this time, less fevered unconsciousness and more healing slumber. Owen maintained his watch through the night, but a sense of cautious hope had replaced his earlier dread. The dawn of the 3rd day brought the first real sign of improvement. Olivia's fever, while still present, had noticeably diminished. When she woke, her eyes were clear, and she managed to drink a full cup of broth without assistance. "You've been here the entire time?" she asked, noticing Owen's stubbled face and rumpled clothing. He nodded, suddenly self-conscious. Seemed the proper thing to do. 3 days, she murmured, studying him with new eyes. "You've cooled my brow for 3 days straight." "Not much of a host otherwise," he replied with a small shrug. "Couldn't exactly show you around the place while you were unconscious." A soft laugh escaped her, followed immediately by a grimace. "It hurts to laugh." "Then I won't be funny," he promised solemnly, which only made her smile again. "I'm afraid this isn't how I plan to make my first impression," Olivia said, gesturing weakly to her disheveled state. "First impressions are overrated," Owen replied. "I'd rather know a person can endure hardship than see them at their best." Dr. Wilson's visit that afternoon confirmed what Owen had already sensed: the fever was breaking. "She's not out of danger entirely," the doctor cautioned. "The lungs can remain vulnerable after influenza. Keep her warm, continue with the medicines for another 3 days, and don't let her overexert herself." "I'm right here," Olivia pointed out from the bed, a hint of her spirit showing through the illness. The doctor smiled apologetically. "Habit, Miss Whitmore. Patients are often talked about rather than to." "Mrs. Callahan, eventually," she said, then blushed as she realized the presumption. "That is, when," Owen interrupted firmly, "when you're well." That evening, with Olivia able to sit up slightly against the pillows and take small spoonfuls of Martha's chicken soup, Owen finally allowed himself to leave the cabin long enough to properly tend his livestock and wash in the creek behind the property. The cold water revived him, and he shaved carefully before returning to the house, feeling more human than he had in days. He found Olivia awake, her red hair loosely braided Martha's work, no doubt, and her cheeks showing the first hint of natural color rather than fever's flush. "You look better," she observed as he entered, "Speak for yourself," he replied, setting down the lantern he'd carried. "First time I've seen you without thinking you might be at death's door." "Such flattery," she teased weakly. He pulled his chair closer to the bed. "How are you feeling, truly?" "Like I've been trampled by a herd of cattle," she admitted. "But my head is clearer. I remember pieces of the past few days. Your voice, mostly. You talked to me." Owen felt heat rise in his face. "Doctor said it might help hearing a familiar voice." "But I wasn't familiar to you," she pointed out. "We'd never met." "Your letters," he said simply. "I felt I knew you through them." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the magnitude of their situation settling between them. They were strangers bound by a contract and letters, thrown into intimacy by circumstance rather than choice. "I should thank you," Olivia finally said. "Not many men would have done what you did." "Any decent man would," he countered. "Perhaps." Her green eyes, still tired but much more alert, studied him carefully. "But decent men are rarer than one might hope." Something in her tone suggested experience with men who had fallen short of decency, and Owen felt a surge of protectiveness toward her. "You're safe here," he promised. "Whether or not you still wish to go through with our arrangement." Surprise flickered across her face. "You're giving me a choice." "Of course," he said, confused by her reaction. "I wouldn't hold you to a contract when circumstances have changed so drastically." Olivia was quiet for a long moment. "In your letters, you described your ranch, your hopes for expanding it. You mentioned wanting children someday. You wrote about building a life together, not just a convenient arrangement." Owen nodded, uncertain where she was headed with this line of thought. "Did you mean those things?" she asked. "Every word," he answered without hesitation. She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her tired face. "Then I see no reason to change our plans, though perhaps we might take some time to properly meet before standing before a preacher." Relief washed over Owen, surprising in its intensity. He hadn't realized how much he had come to want this marriage until faced with the possibility of it not happening. "I'd like that," he said simply. The next week passed in a blur of gradual recovery. Olivia regained her strength slowly, progressing from sitting up in bed to short walks around the cabin, to finally venturing outside to sit on the porch and breathe the clean Nevada air. Owen divided his time between ranch work and keeping her company, bringing her books from town, and telling her stories about Unionville and its inhabitants. They learned each other in bits and pieces, her love of poetry and his unexpected knowledge of stars, her skill with numbers and his talent for working with horses, her childhood in Boston, and his upbringing on ranches across the West. "I never thought I'd end up here," Olivia admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "After my parents died, I felt so lost. Marriage seemed the only practical option." "Practical doesn't mean without feeling," Owen said, his eyes on the distant horizon. "My folks had a marriage of convenience that grew into something real. Sometimes love comes after the vows, not before." Olivia studied his profile, the strong jaw, the slight cleft in his chin, the eyes that reflected the changing sky. "And sometimes," she said softly, "it starts with a fever and a man who won't leave your side." His gaze met hers, surprise giving way to something warmer. He didn't speak, but his hand moved to cover hers on the porch railing, rough calluses against her still soft skin. 2 weeks after her arrival in Unionville, Dr. Wilson declared Olivia fully recovered. "A remarkable constitution," he pronounced. "Though I suspect your nurse deserves some credit as well." Owen had insisted on maintaining propriety once Olivia was well enough to be left alone, moving his bedroll to the second room of the cabin, despite her protests that he'd already seen her at her worst. Different circumstances, he'd explained gruffly. Wouldn't be proper now. The day the preacher was due to arrive in Unionville, Owen woke early and left the cabin before Olivia stirred. He returned an hour later to find her dressed in her best gown, the one she'd intended to wear upon her arrival, her hair carefully arranged, and a nervous smile on her face. "Do I look presentable?" she asked, turning slowly. "I want to make a better second impression on the town." Owen cleared his throat, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. "You look beautiful," he managed finally. She blushed, the color highlighting the freckles that dusted her cheeks. "You clean up rather nicely yourself," she observed, noting his fresh shirt and carefully combed hair. He held out his hand, revealing his mother's silver brooch, a delicate piece shaped like a rose with a small pearl at its center. "I mentioned this in my letters," he said. "It was my mother's. I'd like you to have it, if you're sure about today." Olivia's eyes widened. "Owen, it's lovely." She touched it reverently before meeting his gaze. "And yes, I'm sure. These past weeks, difficult as they began, have shown me more about the kind of man you are than a year of conventional courtship could have." He pinned the brooch carefully to her dress, his fingers brushing against the fabric covering her collarbone. The touch, innocent as it was, sent warmth spreading through both of them. "Shall we?" he asked, offering his arm. The ride into town was quiet, each lost in their own thoughts about the step they were about to take. Unionville had turned out in force for the occasion, the small church packed with curious townsfolk, eager to see the mail-order bride who had arrived at death's door, and the rancher who had nursed her back to health. The ceremony itself was simple and brief, the preacher's words traditional yet somehow weightier for the journey that had brought them to this moment. When Owen slipped a plain gold band onto Olivia's finger, purchased during one of his trips into town, while she recovered, his hand trembled slightly, betraying the emotion he kept carefully controlled. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the preacher announced. "You may kiss your bride." Owen hesitated, acutely aware of the audience and the newness of their relationship. He leaned forward slowly, giving Olivia every chance to turn away. Instead, she rose slightly on her toes, meeting him halfway in a kiss that was gentle but held the promise of deeper feeling to come. The celebration afterward at the town's only restaurant was boisterous, with more food than Owen had seen in one place since the last harvest festival. Townspeople approached in a steady stream, women embracing Olivia as if she were a long-lost friend, men clapping Owen on the shoulder and offering knowing winks that made him want to disappear into the floorboards. "They're acting like we're the first people to ever get married," he muttered when they finally had a moment alone. Olivia laughed, the sound light and melodious. "We're a story, Owen. The mail-order bride who arrived with a fever, the cowboy who cooled her brow for 3 days straight." "It's romantic, is it?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Didn't seem romantic at the time, mostly terrifying," her expression softened. "That's what makes it romantic. You were afraid for me, a woman you'd never met, and you cared for me anyway." Before he could respond, they were pulled back into the celebrations. It was late afternoon before they finally made their escape, riding back to the ranch as husband and wife. The awkwardness that Owen had feared didn't materialize. Instead, there was a comfortable familiarity as they moved around the cabin together, the routine they'd established during her convalescence adapting naturally to their new relationship. "I've been meaning to show you something," Owen said as evening approached. "If you're not too tired from the day's events." Olivia shook her head. "Not at all." He led her outside and around to the back of the cabin where a small garden had been planted. Neat rows of vegetables grew alongside herbs and, surprisingly, flowers, bright patches of color against the practical greenery. I started it after my mother died, he explained. She always wanted a proper garden. The vegetables made sense for survival, but the flowers, he shrugged, seemed important to have beauty alongside practicality. Olivia reached for his hand. Thank you for showing me. It's yours now, he said, to change or expand however you like. Ours, she corrected gently, like everything else. As the sun set, casting long shadows across their land, Owen found himself studying his wife's profile against the darkening sky. The word still felt strange wife, but the woman herself had become familiar in ways he couldn't have anticipated. What are you thinking? Olivia asked, catching his gaze. That I'm glad you had a fever, he admitted, then immediately grimaced. That came out wrong. She laughed, squeezing his hand. I understand what you meant. Without those 3 days, we might have proceeded according to plan, practical strangers making a practical arrangement. Instead, I got to know you when all the usual pretenses were stripped away, he finished, and you got to see me at my most worried and disheveled. Exactly. She turned to face him fully. There's a certain intimacy in that, don't you think? To have already seen each other vulnerable. Owen nodded, thinking of how she had looked in those fevered days, fragile yet fighting, and how it had awakened something protective and tender in him that he hadn't known existed. I do. They stood together in the growing darkness, the first stars appearing above them, neither rushing to break the moment. When Olivia shivered slightly in the cooling air, Owen placed an arm around her shoulders, drawing her against his side. She fit there perfectly, as if the space had been waiting for her all along. Shall we go inside? He asked softly. It's getting cold. She nodded, but before they turned back toward the cabin, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, a kiss different from their ceremonial one, more certain and filled with a quiet promise. Thank you, she whispered against his mouth, for everything. In that moment, under the vast Nevada sky with the woman who had traveled so far to find him, Owen Callahan knew that what had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into something much more valuable, a beginning, a partnership, and if they were fortunate, a love that would continue to grow with each passing day. The seasons changed, summer giving way to fall, and then to a winter that proved milder than usual. Owen and Olivia settled into a rhythm of life together, their initial carefulness around each other gradually relaxing into genuine companionship. The cabin, once sparse and utilitarian, took on touches of Olivia's influence: curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on their bed, shelves Owen built to house the books she ordered from catalogs. Olivia proved herself adept at ranch life despite her city upbringing. She kept meticulous records of their finances, identifying ways to improve their efficiency that Owen had never considered. She learned to milk the cow, tend the garden, and even assist with the cattle on occasion. Her initial squeamishness around the animals gave way to confidence, though she drew the line at helping with branding. I'll provide the coffee and bandages, she told Owen firmly. The actual burning of flesh I'll leave to you. For his part, Owen found himself changing as well. He spoke more, for one thing, no longer limited to the terse conversations of work or the occasional drink at the saloon. Olivia drew him out, asking questions about his day, his thoughts, his memories. She taught him to dance in their small front room, laughing when he stepped on her toes but persisting until he could manage a passable waltz. Where did you learn to dance? He asked one evening as they moved around the room to the music she hummed. My father insisted, she explained. He said every proper young lady should know how to dance. My mother thought it frivolous, but she indulged him. You don't speak of them often, Owen observed carefully. Olivia's steps faltered slightly. It still hurts, she admitted. They were wonderful parents, the fire. It was so sudden. I wasn't home that night. I'd gone to help a friend whose child was ill. When I returned, there was nothing left. Owen pulled her closer, abandoning the formal dance position for a simple embrace. I'm sorry. She rested her head against his chest. What about your father? You've mentioned your mother, but not him. Died when I was 15, Owen said, the familiar ache dulled by time. Cattle drive gone wrong, stampede. He paused. Ma never really recovered from losing him. She held on for another 5 years, but it was like part of her went with him. They stood together in the center of the room, no longer dancing but simply holding each other, sharing the weight of their losses. I used to worry about that, Olivia confessed quietly. Loving someone so much that losing them would destroy me. And now? She looked up at him, her green eyes serious. Now I think perhaps the risk is worth it. That loving deeply, even knowing it might end in pain, is braver than never loving at all. Owen brushed a strand of hair from her face, the gesture tender. When did you get so wise, Mrs. Callahan? Probably around the time I decided to marry a stranger in Nevada, she replied with a small smile. Their physical relationship had developed slowly, tentatively. On their wedding night, Owen had been careful and considerate, mindful of Olivia's recent illness and their brief acquaintance. But as the weeks passed, their initial shyness gave way to a deeper intimacy, each discovering what pleased the other, building a connection that was both passionate and tender. By midwinter, Olivia began to suspect that their family might be expanding sooner than they had planned. The first morning she was ill, Owen hovered anxiously, memories of her arrival still fresh enough to trigger concern. It's not influenza, she assured him after the third consecutive morning of nausea. I believe I'm with child. Owen's reaction, blank shock followed by a grin so wide, it seemed to transform his entire face, was something Olivia knew she would remember for the rest of her life. A baby, he said, as if testing the word. Our baby. It seems so, she confirmed, her own smile matching his. Though we should wait for the doctor's confirmation before telling the entire town. Owen nodded solemnly, then proceeded to tell every person he encountered during his trip into Unionville that afternoon. By the time Olivia visited the general store 3 days later, she was greeted with knowing smiles and offers of baby clothes from every woman in town. So much for discretion, she teased Owen that evening. Martha Jenkins already has a blanket half knitted. He had the grace to look sheepish. I may have mentioned it to Tom at the feed store, and possibly to Sheriff Davis when I ran into him, and the Reverend's wife stopped me to ask about you, and it just slipped out. Olivia laughed, unable to be truly annoyed in the face of his obvious joy. At least wait until we're certain of the due date before you start building a cradle. Too late, he admitted, avoiding her eyes. Started yesterday. As winter gave way to spring, Olivia's pregnancy became more pronounced. Dr. Wilson confirmed what they already knew and estimated the baby would arrive in early fall. Owen grew increasingly protective. Insisting on handling chores, Olivia had routinely managed and watching her like a hawk whenever she ventured outside. I'm pregnant, not made of glass, she reminded him after he nearly had a conniption when she climbed onto a chair to reach a high shelf. Humor me, he requested, his expression so earnest that she relented. The spring roundup presented a challenge. Owen typically spent several days away from the ranch, working with neighboring ranchers to gather cattle that had scattered over the winter. The thought of leaving Olivia alone in her condition troubled him deeply. I'll stay with Eleanor Wilson in town, she suggested, referring to the doctor's wife. That way I'll have company and be close to medical help if needed. It was a sensible solution, but the week of separation was difficult for both of them. Owen returned exhausted but immediately rode to town to bring Olivia home, unable to wait even one more night. "You look tired," she observed as they rode back to the ranch together, her seated side saddle on her gentle mare. "Haven't been sleeping well," he admitted. "Missed you." The simple confession warmed her. "I missed you too. The Wilsons were kind, but it wasn't home." "Home," Owen repeated, glancing at her. "Strange to think that a year ago you'd never even seen this place." "Stranger still to think I can't imagine being anywhere else now," she replied. Summer brought scorching days and the discomforts of late pregnancy in desert heat. Olivia's ankles swelled, her back ached constantly, and sleep became elusive. Owen built a rocking chair for the porch where she could sit in the relative cool of the evenings, the movement soothing both her and the active child within. "He's restless tonight," Olivia commented, placing Owen's hand on her rounded belly to feel the strong kicks. "She," Owen corrected with a smile, "takes after her mother." They had taken to this gentle argument over the baby's gender, neither particularly invested in being right but enjoying the speculation. "Have you thought about names?" Olivia asked, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Owen hesitated. "I thought perhaps James after my father if it's a boy." "James Callahan," Olivia tested the name. "It has a strong sound to it, and if it's a girl, maybe Elizabeth. After your mother," the suggestion touched her deeply. "I'd like that very much." As her due date approached, the entire community of Unionville seemed to hold its collective breath. Women visited regularly, bringing food and advice in equal measure. Owen expanded his already protective nature to near ridiculous levels, barely letting Olivia out of his sight. "I need to check the north pasture fence," he said one morning in early September, clearly torn. "But I can wait if you'd rather I stay close." "Owen," Olivia said firmly, "I am not due for another 2 weeks according to Dr. Wilson. The fence won't fix itself. Go." He went, but returned in record time, pushing his horse harder than was strictly necessary. Olivia merely shook her head at his anxious expression when he burst through the door to find her peacefully mending one of his shirts. "The baby is still precisely where it was when you left," she informed him dryly. Owen had the grace to look embarrassed. "The fence can wait another day or two." 3 days later, in the pre-dawn hours, Olivia woke to the unmistakable sensation of her waters breaking. She reached for Owen, who was instantly alert despite the early hour. "It's time," she said simply. The calm preparation they had discussed was immediately abandoned as Owen scrambled into his clothes, nearly falling in his haste to pull on his boots. "I'll get the wagon ready," he said, his voice pitched higher than normal. "Then I'll come back for you, don't move." "Where exactly do you think I'm going to go?" Olivia asked, amused despite the first twinges of pain beginning to make themselves known. The ride to town and doctor. Wilson's small clinic seemed interminable, each jolt of the wagon causing Olivia to grit her teeth against increasing contractions. Owen's face was a mask of concern, his knuckles white on the reins. "Almost there," he assured her repeatedly. "Just a little further." By the time they arrived, Olivia was in active labor. Eleanor Wilson took charge immediately, directing Owen to wait outside while she and the doctor attended to Olivia. But Owen protested. "No arguments," Eleanor said firmly. "This is women's business. We'll call you when it's over." The next 12 hours were the longest of Owen's life. He paced the small waiting area until Tom Jenkins, passing by and seeing his distress, forced him to sit and drink coffee. More townspeople stopped by, offering encouragement and distractions that Owen barely registered. His entire focus was on the door separating him from Olivia and the sounds of her labor that occasionally reached him. "First babies often take their time," Sheriff Davis assured him. My Alina was in labor for 20 hours with our first. This information did nothing to calm Owen's nerves. Finally, as afternoon faded toward evening, a new sound broke through the haze of worry, the strong, indignant cry of a newborn. Owen was on his feet instantly, poised at the door until Alina opened it, her face tired but smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Callahan," she said. "You have a son." Owen entered the room tentatively, his eyes finding Olivia immediately. She lay propped against pillows, her face flushed and hair damp with exertion, but her smile was radiant as she cradled a small bundle against her chest. "Come meet your son," she invited softly. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and perched carefully on the edge of the bed. The baby was tiny, with a shock of dark hair and skin still red from the birth. As Owen watched, the infant's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but unmistakably blue. "James," Olivia said, confirming the name they had discussed. "James Owen Callahan." Owen reached out with a trembling finger to touch his son's cheek. "He's perfect," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect." Dr. Wilson cleared his throat. "Mother and baby are doing well. You can take them home tomorrow if all continues smoothly." Owen nodded, barely registering the doctor's words. His entire world had narrowed to this bed, this woman, this child, his family. "Would you like to hold him?" Olivia asked. "I don't know how," Owen admitted, suddenly terrified at the prospect of handling something so small and fragile. "Like this," Olivia demonstrated, then carefully transferred the baby to his arms. The weight was negligible, yet Owen had never felt anything so significant. James squirmed slightly, then settled against his chest, apparently content in his father's embrace. Something profound shifted within Owen, a protectiveness even more intense than what he felt for Olivia, combined with an overwhelming sense of responsibility and love. "Hello, James," he whispered. "I'm your pa." Olivia watched them, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain the emotion. This man who had cared for her when she arrived ill and frightened was now holding their child with the same tender attentiveness. The journey from mail-order bride to wife and mother had been unexpected in its turns, but she wouldn't change a single step. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now though they had taken months to first express. "Both of you." Owen looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. "I love you too. Have for a while now, probably since you were too fevered to notice." The first weeks with James were a blur of exhaustion and wonder. The baby proved to have strong lungs and definite opinions about when he should be fed, changed, or simply held. Olivia moved through her days in a state of perpetual fatigue, marveling at how completely this small being had taken over their lives. Owen surprised her with his willingness to participate in all aspects of infant care. He changed soiled diapers without complaint, walked the floor with James during fussy periods, and insisted Olivia rest whenever possible. The tenderness with which this strong, capable rancher handled their son melted something in Olivia's heart each time she witnessed it. "You're a natural," she observed one evening as Owen expertly swaddled James after his bath. "Just doing what needs doing," he replied with characteristic understatement. "Besides, I had good practice when you were sick." "Babies and fevered brides aren't so different, both need cooling cloths and gentle handling." Olivia laughed. "I'm quite certain I wasn't as cute as James. Different kind of beautiful," Owen said seriously, placing the now sleeping baby in the cradle he had built. "Both precious to me." As fall deepened toward winter, they established new routines around James's needs. Olivia learned to manage household tasks with a baby at her breast or sleeping nearby. Owen adjusted his ranch work to be closer to the house when possible, checking in frequently. The cabin, small as it was, felt full in a way it never had before, not crowded but complete. When James was 3 months old, they bundled him warmly and took him to Unionville for his first Christmas service at the church. The entire congregation seemed determined to get a look at the newest Callahan, and James was passed from one admiring set of arms to another until Owen finally reclaimed him, tucking the baby protectively against his chest. "Everyone wants to hold him," Olivia pointed out, amused by Owen's possessiveness. "They've held him plenty," he grumbled. "He's getting overstimulated." James, for his part, seemed entirely content, watching the world with curious eyes from the safety of his father's arms. After the service, they joined the community celebration in the church hall. Tables groaned with food, a tree decorated with handmade ornaments stood in one corner, and children ran excitedly between adult conversations. It was a scene of warmth and belonging that Olivia would have scarcely believed possible when she'd boarded that stagecoach a year and a half earlier. "Thinking deep thoughts?" Owen asked, finding her near the punch bowl, James now sleeping against his shoulder. "Just reflecting on how much has changed," she replied. "When I answered your advertisement, I hoped for security, perhaps eventual companionship. I never expected this." She gestured around them, encompassing not just the celebration but everything their life had become. Owen shifted James to his other shoulder, his free hand finding hers. "Wasn't what I expected either. Thought I was getting a practical arrangement, someone to keep house while I worked the ranch. Got a partner instead, and a son." He squeezed her fingers. "And love, which I wasn't looking for at all." Olivia leaned against him, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "Who would have thought fever could be so fortuitous?" "Best thing that ever happened to us," Owen agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Though I wouldn't recommend it as a courtship strategy generally." As they rode home that night, James bundled securely between them. Snow began to fall, gentle flakes that caught in Olivia's eyelashes and dusted Owen's hat. The landscape transformed around them, familiar contours softening under the growing blanket of white. "Beautiful," Olivia breathed, watching the moonlight reflect off the snow. Owen's gaze was fixed not on the scenery but on her face, illuminated by starlight and wonder. "Yes," he agreed softly. "Beautiful." Spring brought new calves to the ranch and new developments for James, who began crawling with determined enthusiasm, exploring every corner of the cabin. Owen built a low fence around the fireplace after finding their son heading purposefully toward the hearth for the third time in a single morning. "He's fearless," Owen observed with equal parts pride and terror. "Going to be a handful." "Wonder where he gets that from," Olivia replied pointedly, having witnessed Owen's own tendency to approach dangerous tasks with perhaps less caution than advisable. The ranch prospered that year. Owen's careful breeding program began to show results in the quality of their calves, and Olivia's meticulous record keeping allowed them to make informed decisions about which animals to sell and which to keep. They discussed expansion, perhaps purchasing adjacent land that had recently become available. "It would mean taking on debt," Owen cautioned. "Might be safer to wait another year or two." "Or it might mean missing an opportunity," Olivia countered. "The numbers suggest we could manage it, especially if beef prices hold steady." They debated, not arguing but genuinely considering each other's perspective, eventually deciding to make an offer on the smaller of two available parcels. When the sale was finalized, they celebrated with a special dinner, James banging happily on his high-chair tray as his parents toasted their expanding enterprise. "To Callahan Ranch," Owen said, raising his glass. "Growing in all the best ways." As their second wedding anniversary approached, Owen became mysteriously busy with a project he refused to discuss. Olivia caught him measuring things in the yard, consulting with Tom Jenkins, and making trips to town without explanation. Should I be concerned about these secretive activities? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch, James already asleep inside. Owen attempted to look innocent and failed completely. Just a small project, nothing to worry about. The small project was revealed the day before their anniversary when Owen led her around to what had been an empty space behind the barn. There stood a new structure, not large but solidly built, with a door and 2 windows. "What is this?" Olivia asked, confused. "Your studio," Owen explained, opening the door to reveal a bright, simple room with a large table, shelves, and a comfortable chair. "I know you've been keeping the ranch books at the kitchen table, and with James getting into everything now, I thought you might like a space of your own." Olivia stepped inside, stunned by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Natural light poured through the windows, illuminating the simple, functional space. A vase of wildflowers sat on the table, Owen's one concession to decoration. "This is—" Words failed her momentarily. "Owen, it's perfect." "Not much to look at," he said modestly. "But it's sturdy, and I made sure to put it close enough to the house that you can hear James if he needs you." Olivia turned to him, tears threatening. "Thank you, not just for this, but for understanding what I needed before I even knew myself." As she explored the space, running her fingers over the smooth wooden surfaces, she noticed a small box on one of the shelves. "What's this?" "The rest of your present," Owen admitted. "Go ahead." Inside the box lay a fountain pen and a leather-bound journal, simple but high-quality items she would never have purchased for herself. "For your writing," Owen explained. "I've seen you scribbling on scraps of paper when you think I'm not looking. Thought you might like something proper to write in." The gift touched her even more deeply than the studio itself. That Owen had noticed her private moments of creativity, understood her need for self-expression beyond her roles as wife and mother, spoke to how truly he saw her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, clutching the journal to her chest. "You don't need to say anything," he assured her. "Just wanted you to have something that's just yours amid all the things that are ours." Olivia set the journal down carefully and wrapped her arms around her husband's neck. "I love you," she whispered, "more than I ever thought possible when I stepped off that stagecoach." Owen's arms tightened around her waist. "Even with the fever, especially with the fever," she confirmed. "It was the worst thing that ever happened to me." "To us," he corrected, lowering his mouth to hers in a kiss that still held the power to make her heart race, even after 2 years of marriage. They celebrated their anniversary quietly, with a special dinner after James was asleep, and time alone together that reminded them both of how far they had come from those first tentative days of their marriage. The next morning, Owen found Olivia already in her new studio, writing in the journal while the early light streamed through the windows. "What are you working on?" he asked, setting a cup of coffee beside her. She smiled up at him. "Our story. I thought James might like to know it someday, how his parents met, how his father cooled his mother's brow for 3 days straight, and how a practical arrangement became something neither of us expected." "A love story," Owen summarized, his hand resting on her shoulder. "The best kind," Olivia agreed. "The kind that's real." Outside the window, Unionville, Nevada, was coming to life, the town that had become home to a Boston girl who had traveled across a continent to find not just security but love, family, and a sense of belonging she had feared lost forever. Inside, in the quiet of her new studio, Olivia Callahan continued writing, preserving for their son the story of a fever, a cowboy's dedication, and the unexpected journey from strangers to beloved family. In the years that followed, Callahan Ranch continued to flourish. Owen and Olivia expanded their operations gradually, adding sheep to diversify their income and hiring 2 ranch hands to help manage the growing workload. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's determined nature and his mother's quick mind. When he was 4, he welcomed a sister, Elizabeth Martha Callahan, named for Olivia's mother and the woman who had helped nurse Olivia through those first critical days in Unionville. 2 children, Owen marveled as he watched James solemnly examining his new baby sister. More than I ever thought I'd have. More than I dared hope for after losing my parents, Olivia agreed, smoothing Elizabeth's wispy red hair the same shade as her own. A family built from nothing but letters and faith. Owen smiled at the memory. And fever. Don't forget the fever. As if I could, Olivia laughed. It's become practically legendary in town. I heard Mrs. Peterson telling a new arrival that you didn't sleep for a week straight while nursing me back to health. Only 3 days, Owen corrected, though his expression suggested he would have done a week if necessary. Best 3 days I ever spent bringing you back to me before I'd even properly met you. Olivia reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. I'm glad I found my way to you, fever and all. Wouldn't change a moment of it. Neither would I, Owen agreed, watching their son now carefully patting the baby's hand. Not a single moment. And in that peaceful scene, 2 children, a home filled with love, and a partnership forged in unexpected circumstances, the story that began with a mail-order bride arriving with a fever found its perfect continuation. Not an ending, but a middle, rich with possibility and the promise of many more chapters yet to come.